Katharine Orton had always wanted to write books, but kept her dreams to herself while she worked as a stained glass teacher, in copywriting, and also for the children's book publishers Barefoot Books. Her dream has now been realised with the recent release of her debut novel Nevertell, a story of friendship, survival, sorcery and courage, inspired by her love of folklore and fairy tales, the creepier the better. She met recently with Nikki Gamble to talk about her new book and what's coming next.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to be a children's novelist. I know that you've worked in children's books for a while, so what's your journey been to publication?
Well, I did work for a little while in children's publishing, probably a year or two, and that was very much because I wanted to be a writer, really. So I was coming at it with a view to sort of see what the industry was like and just learn as much as I possibly could, really. I did actually move on from that and go into copywriting for a bit, and then gave that up altogether and worked in stained glass for a few years.
Oh my goodness!
And that was primarily because I love stained glass, but also to give me the time to write, because I started to realise that was really what I wanted to focus on as much as I could. So.
Did you join any writers groups or take any courses in creative writing, or is it all self-initiated?
No, I did study English at uni, and I did seek out a couple of courses when I was in Bristol as well, just to sort of kind of make myself do it. I think with writing, that's one of the things, kind of one of the challenges, is to just make yourself actually do it and make that space and time to do it as well. So everything was with a view to that, really.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, isn't it? There's lots of people who say they want to write, and probably for the rest of their lives they're going to keep saying they want to write. It's that thing that you do that actually makes you get on with it. So,
yeah, definitely.
And you did, and Nevertell is about to hit the bookshops. Can you tell us, maybe in just 2 or 3 sentences, just set the book up for us, tell us what it's about?
Okay, well, it's about Lena, who stumbles upon an escape plot being hatched in the Soviet prison camp that she was born in, and goes along with this escape plot, only to find herself being kind of chased across Siberia by a vengeful sorceress and her pack of shadow wolves.
Yeah. Now, there's some great characters in this story, not least the heroine, Lena. Tell us how she entered your imagination.
She came to me first as a little boy. I don't think I've ever told anyone that before, but that's who she was at first, this little blonde boy. And slowly I sort of started to think, well, what if she was a girl? And then I feel like that's when her personality and everything really came together, and I really got a sense of who she was.
I know sometimes it's hard to articulate process, because we're not always conscious of the way that happens.
Yeah.
But have you got any inclination as to what it was in switching to a girl that made it easier for this character to develop?
I wonder if I just could relate a little bit easier to a young girl's sort of situation and growing up, maybe. And yeah, you're right, it is really hard to articulate the process, definitely, because I mean, as I've been thinking about recently, a lot of the characters, I'm not really sure where they came from. They must have come from somewhere. They certainly came from me, from my brain, but where exactly in that brain?
Exactly, really hard to say. Lena has a great friend. I love the friendship between her and Bogdan, and for a while I thought she was going to leave him behind in this prison camp, which would have been tragic. So why didn't you leave him there? Why did he set off on the travels?
Well, it's really funny that you say that, actually, because in the very first draft, Bogdan did stay behind in the prison camp.
I'm almost crying now.
I know, but then this is the other weird thing about characters. I got maybe a third of the way through, maybe half of the way through this very early draft, and it was just so clear that something was wrong, that something was missing. And I had this character, Bogdan, nagging me in my head, saying, essentially that he should have been there. And it was so hard, from that moment on, it was so hard to finish writing that draft without him in it, because he was so insistent. And I realised essentially that he needed to have been on the journey, partly because that was just in his nature, I think, but also it adds a new dimension to the story. It adds that solid friendship and comradeship between Lena and Bogdan.
Could be quite bleak without him, and that
definitely
gives an element of warmth to the story, doesn't it?
It would have been completely different without him. I don't think it would have been the same story at all.
So interesting that the characters are in control.
I know, it's slightly worrying.
I also love Katya.
Oh yeah,
what a great role model.
Yeah, she's my favourite.
Does she remind you of anybody in your own circle?
She, I think, comes from bits and pieces of a lot of women that I've known who are very no-nonsense, down the line, kind of, fierce, strong women. And she, funnily enough, was one of those characters, although clearly gathered from a lot of different places, who did almost spring up immediately, fully formed. She was just a presence there.
She's the presence right at the beginning of the novel. Even when she's not there, even in her absence, she's a presence, which is really great. And we should just say that Katya is Lena's mother.
Yes.
In case anybody's not sure about that. And of course, what every good story needs is a great adversary as well. And you have Svetlana, the sorceress.
Yes.
So she's going to remind us of some characters from folklore and fairy tale. Are they part of your preferred reading?
Fairy tales and folklore, absolutely. Yeah, I love fairy tales and collect them as many as I can read and hear.
Fantastic.
I collect, because I think they're just one of the best forms of storytelling. I just love them.
So I suppose there are kind of echoes of the Snow Queen in her, and of course writers through the ages have picked up on that. I mean, C.S. Lewis is another, isn't he, with those Queens of the Cold. Tell us about some of your favourite fairy stories.
Oh, okay. Well, I love Russian and Slavic fairy tales and folklore. They're some of my favourites in all the world. Hence, I think why this is kind of set in Russia and Siberia. And there's one called The Stone Flower, which is actually does have a lot of influence on the book.
I don't know that one. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's about a stone carver, an apprentice stone carver who wants to create some true beauty and goes off in search of the mistress of the Copper Mountain, who purportedly has this stone flower, which is the most beautifully crafted piece of stonework sort of ever. But all those who enter her domain are never seen again. So that's the setup for the story. But that is the mistress of the Copper Mountain is actually quite a big inspiration for Svetlana. Yeah.
It's interesting that you've picked a fairy tale there that's not well told. It's a shame, isn't it, that some stories just don't seem to be within that canon that is regularly retold to children.
Definitely. I think fairy tales are so much more than Cinderella, and there is such a wealth of fairy tales and folklore as well, all around the world. And of course, originally that would have all been passed on through word of mouth. And yes, it is a shame, I think, that some of those are kind of left dwindling a little bit.
You've picked out Russian and Slavic, so there must be something in that tone and that feel that's different from the other, say, European tales, the French, the German collections. What is it that you think makes them essentially Russian in flavour?
Oh, wow, that's a really tricky question. I think they just have a certain something to them that does set them apart. I don't know if it's the surroundings or like the setting, or just the kind of grit of some of the characters maybe, but I do absolutely love them, and I love some of the conventions as well of the area, such as having these little animal helpers who maybe the protagonist will come across in some sort of form of distress and offer a kindness to, and they will then come back later on to help them. I love that. That's another little convention of them.
Now, your Svetlana, your sorceress, if you like, she has her pack of shadow wolves.
Indeed.
Tell us about those. Oh, I can feel the chills running through my bones already.
She's a very powerful sorceress, as we know, and she uses these wolves to hunt, and she's in the area known as the Manhunter. So she uses these sort of ghost wolves, these shadow wolves, to track down her prey.
I think it's a really good point to stop and have a reading.
Oh, okay. Okay, this is from chapter 14. So I'll just read a few pages from here. A fifth howl joined the chorus. It was the hunting pack. Quick, said Lena, recovering fastest. Run. The mine with its snow-covered entrances was far behind them now, but the snow underfoot was still unpredictable. Last night's storm had sculpted a new landscape over the old, a false floor laced with tricks and traps. Sometimes it held up against the pounding of their feet. Other times their legs plunged right through it up to the knee. The howls got louder at a shocking speed. Now Lena could hear the beasts snarling and panting right behind them. She risked stumbling to glance over her shoulder. Nothing for miles. Nothing but her own breath. It couldn't be. The creatures were so close that Lena could hear their claws tearing up sod and snow. But they were nowhere to be seen. It didn't make any sense. There was only one explanation, that old Gleb's stories about the ghost hounds were true. She pushed the panic down into her stomach, as far from her thoughts as possible. She could hear the hounds gaining on them. At this rate, they'd be caught in moments. She had to think. Lena glanced left. There, a sheer ridge dropped away into who knew what. A bed of sharp rocks, a ravine. There was nothing else for it. This way. Lena grabbed Bogdan's coat sleeve and dragged him with her. She leaped without hesitating, and so did he. They plunged straight over the edge. Her stomach lurched. Her feet pedalled the air. She sailed above trees, snow, rocks. Then she dropped. Bogdan did too. The ground rounded up to meet them like the curl of a giant's tongue.
Wow, and we can hear from that excerpt that there's some real jeopardy in this magical adventure. The adversaries feel quite scary, but there's another adversary really in the story, which is the setting itself and that intense cold. Did you find it hard to keep up that intensity of coldness in the writing?
I didn't really, because I just imagine what it would be like to be out there, and it gave me the chills just to think about it, really. So that was quite easy to imagine in lots of ways.
The other thing that really struck me about your writing was this wonderful pacing, really, of the story. It's suspenseful, there's a lot of tension there. Did that just flow naturally from your pen, or did you have to go back and just edit to make sure that you got that balance right?
Well, I really did want it to be pacey, and I wanted it to be exciting, because I feel like that's what I would want to read. So I did write with that in mind. I really did want to keep up this sense of tension, but it took a lot of sort of going back over, quite a few runs to go back over and just make sure that everything was as tense and as kind of tight as possible.
Are there any specific changes that you had to make to achieve that?
There was probably a few moments here and there, like when there's a point when, just after they've escaped, they have to circumnavigate the mine, which is where the people in the prison camp go to work. And that, when I first wrote it, was just a bit wet. They went round the mine, and that was it. So I went back and sort of really, I made that as tense as possible. I think sometimes when your head is somewhere else and you're thinking of the next thing that's going to happen, it's often hard to be in the moment and write in that moment. So actually going back over the story is brilliant. It's something I love to do, because it's almost like you've got that all out, all the rest of it to come out. So now you can go back and really take your time and look at those places.
That's an interesting thought. It's almost as though your head is racing ahead and your hand has got to work fast to keep up with it.
Definitely. When I'm writing, I actually get too ahead of myself, and I've noticed I end up writing half sentences, and then I have to leave that sentence and move on to the next one before I finished, just so I remember what's going to happen. So I'm always racing ahead, and then we'll go back and kind of fill each sentence in.
Fascinating.
It's very strange. It's not something I'd realised before, but I've noticed recently that I do it, especially when I get really into it. I'll just write all these sort of snippets and half sentences and then have to go back.
Interesting. And useful for us in terms of working with children. Actually, it's okay sometimes to have scraps of writing and bits of writing, because we can't all, our hands can't keep up with the ideas in our heads sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a different way of writing for every writer. I know people who write sort of little notes on scraps of envelopes and all over the place, and others who'll just sit down and write from beginning to end. So everybody has a different way.
Tension also comes not only from those moments of excitement, but also from withholding information and from secrets that are there in the story. Now, we don't want to give too much away, but can you tell us something about secrets and how that is a plot driver?
I wanted there to be a lot that was hidden that would kind of come to light in the end. So really what I started with was a backstory, which I kind of knew was there, and I had to explore how best to sort of pick out here and there. But I'm not sure what I can say without giving too much away, but there is a lot to Svetlana and her motivations for why she is chasing these children, why she is the person she is, which I think makes her a really interesting baddie. It stops it from being two-dimensional, doesn't
it?
Definitely. And there is a lot to do with Lena and her parentage as well, which I wanted to remain slightly ambiguous until the very end, and
the seeds are there right at the beginning.
Yes,
good stuff. I wondered, with your writing environment, what it looks like. So, for example, are you somebody that has to surround yourself with the visuals of the place that you're writing, or do you like a blank wall? Do you like music? Do you like to be in busy places or quiet places? What's it like for you?
Well, my writing place is my sofa, which I plunk myself on, and surrounded by mess usually, and I just block everything else out. I absolutely love music, but unfortunately can't listen to it when I'm writing because it completely interferes with my kind of flow and everything down to just the sentence sort of structure. So I like to just sit in silence. It doesn't sound very nice, but I like to sit in silence on my sofa, surrounded by mess, and just get on with it.
But again, I think that's a really insightful point, because some people like to surround themselves with things, and others it's all in their head, and they just want to shut everything else out and allow that to have its space, really.
Definitely, I think I'm definitely the latter.
Yeah. So I wondered, just to finish off, Katharine, I know the first book's not published yet officially, but I also know that you're probably working on the next project, because it'll be some time ago that you delivered this.
Yeah.
So has that been easy to write a second book? The first book, of course, you deliver it, you've got as long as you want to write that. Yeah. The second book, things like deadlines come into play. So tell me about that process.
It's been very challenging. I am someone who likes to kind of dip under the radar, really. I like to shut myself away, kind of hide away, busy myself with this project, and then sort of surprise people with it. Like, oh, here you are, I've done it. But this one, of course, there was a certain expectation set already, and I've definitely found that challenging. So it's been interesting. It's been interesting for me to find a way to block out those pressures as well, and just get on with it and get the story that I really want to tell out of my head and onto the page.
Does that new process mean that you have to share things before you feel you're ready to share them? Are you somebody that likes to complete before letting others in?
I do like to get things to a certain standard, yes. But on the other hand, I found having an editor and an agent as well, people to bounce ideas off of, absolutely brilliant. It's been so fantastic to know that they are used to looking at things that aren't necessarily in a completely polished state, and they will have ideas for you as well. I've actually surprised myself by really enjoying that kind of.
That's fantastic. Katharine, can I just thank you so much for joining us in the Reading Corner today. I'm sure people are going to really enjoy Nevertell. The perfect Christmas read, I would say.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to In the Reading Corner with Just Imagine. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you can find many more on the podcast section of our website, justimagine.co.uk, plus via iTunes or SoundCloud or your usual podcast provider. Don't forget to pass the pod and recommend this fantastic free resource to your friends and colleagues.